After Judge Beverly Cannone had given over an hour of jury instructions, the jury went off to deliberate. At one point, they came back with a question. They were seated in the courtroom as the judge answered the question. Before they left, while they were still seated in the courtroom, Alan Jackson stood up and asked a question of his own. The answer the judge gave in front of the jury is what the SJC will be reading the transcript of. This is the actual footage in the court from which the transcript came.
22117.
All right, so why are we out here?
Your Honor, I just saw the verdict forms, and as we discussed yesterday, the amendments that the court indicated it would make on the verdict.
Oh, no.
have not been made.
Okay, I did not say I'd make it. I said I'd think about it. I said I was tired and I needed to think about it.
Remember, the jury had already convened deliberations, so they already had these forms, and the judge had already decided not to change the forms.
You said before you were tired and you needed to think about it was you agreed that there needs to be not guilty options for the subordinate charges under count 2.
I said that it made sense to me, but no, I did not change it upon looking at it because the verdict slip, this verdict slip as submitted to the jury, is exactly how it always is in Massachusetts.
And there you have it, from the judge's own mouth, she did not change the forms. Whether she made a conscious decision or not is up for debate, because we all heard her say on a hot mic, "Oops, we forgot to change the forms." Nonetheless, she is about to give the jury more instructions right there in front of the jury.
Can I ask you a question then? I don't really care how it always is in Massachusetts. I care about whether or not it's appropriate.
It's appropriate.
Different things.
It's appropriate.
Let me make my argument, if you wouldn't mind, Judge, why it's not appropriate. For a superior charge, they have to decide that she is not guilty of the superior charge, and that is the starting point of whether or not she is guilty or not guilty of any subordinate charge, often called a lesser included. Once they decide that she's not guilty of the superior charge, now there's two additional charges that they've been instructed they must decide whether she's guilty or not guilty of. How do they decide that she's not guilty of the first subordinate charge, involuntary manslaughter?
Okay. Anything else you want to say, Mr. Jackson?
Clearly, she was trying to avoid answering that question in front of the jury.
I'd like an answer from the court. How do they decide that she's not guilty of involuntary manslaughter on that verdict form?
That's their decision to make.
And how do they make it if they don't have an option to check a box that says not guilty?
They don't check the box that says guilty, do they?
Did you get that, jurors? Don't tick the box that says guilty.
And then when they go to the next block, they don't check the block that says guilty, and on the top, you're left with not guilty. Okay?
So it's the absence of the check mark that the court determines is the not guilty finding by the jury.
Yes, that's what the verdict slip reads.
Did you get that, jurors? It's the absence of a guilty check mark that says you decided not guilty.
It reads not guilty. If they don't check block 2, 3, or 4, the verdict slip reads not guilty. Okay? That's how it is, Mr. Jackson.
So when the jury didn't tick any boxes and the judge got the forms back, then she should have ruled it as not guilty on all counts, because none of the boxes were ticked.
Well, apparently that's how it's going to be because of the court's order. That is not how it should be, and it's over our strong objection. They need to see that there is a not guilty option for the subordinate charges. If they come back guilty on, for instance, involuntary manslaughter, that's immediately appealable. They didn't have an option on the verdict form to find her not guilty. It's almost like the court is directing a verdict of the subordinate charges.
Okay. I disagree with you.
Okay, you disagree with him, and you just directed the jury to not tick any boxes if they find her not guilty of all the charges. So what did the jury hand her? As she just directed them, 3 pages with no boxes checked. So let's revisit where she declares a mistrial and see if we can spot where she actually looks at those forms to see if any boxes are checked.
Court is in session. Please be seated.
All right, Mr. Foreman, I am in receipt of your note. Judge Cannone, despite our rigorous efforts, we continue to find ourselves at an impasse. Our perspectives on the evidence are starkly divided. Some members of the jury firmly believe that the evidence surpasses the burden of proof, establishing the elements of the charges beyond a reasonable doubt. Conversely, others find the evidence fails to meet this standard and does not sufficiently establish the necessary elements of the charges. The deep division is not due to a lack of effort or diligence, but rather a sincere adherence to our individual principles and moral convictions. To continue to deliberate would be futile and only serve to force us to compromise these deeply held beliefs. I'm not going to do that to you folks. Your service is complete. I'm declaring a mistrial in this case. I'll be in to see you privately in a few minutes. So thank you so much for your service. Okay.
All right, so the court, please.
After telling the jury in the days previous that all they had to do was not check a guilty box, she then proceeded to not even look at the pages that she was handed, and she dismissed the jury before anybody had a chance to object to anything. I don't think the transcripts are going to adequately describe the time frame between calling the mistrial and dismissing the jury, but I do believe the transcripts will adequately describe what she said to the jury when Mr. Jackson raised the question, meaning the SJC will see that as a jury instruction, one of the last jury instructions that she gave before they decided to call it quits. Is Massachusetts missing a third scenario, or is Judge Cannone purposely ignoring a third scenario? If the jury is hung on any of the counts and they're not going to tick a guilty box, then the scenario that Bev's describing, where no guilty box is checked, does not adequately communicate that the jury was hung. In fact, by her own definition, it indicates that the jury found her not guilty on all the charges. Based on that instruction alone, I believe a panel of SJC judges will at least allow a jury hearing. I don't believe the SJC is going to allow the jurors to be treated the way the Commonwealth and Judge Bev are treating them. It may be a little bit too much to expect a new precedent to be set in order to prevent this type of thing from happening again. I'm not saying it won't or it can't. I'm just saying we should probably roll back our expectations, and if it does, we might be pleasantly surprised. Here's hoping a whole panel of judges can see the light.